Today, we are talking about one of the most powerful parts of the fertility journey, and that is letting go. If you have been doing all the things and you feel like your dream of becoming a parent is still so out of reach, then this episode today is going to be for you. We're going to talk about what surrender really means and that it is not giving up, but trusting where you need to be rather than pushing for where you want to go. The kind of letting go that makes your whole life feel easier. It calms your nervous system and it reconnects you to this sense of trust again. Welcome to your journey to fertility. This is the podcast that blends science with spirit to give you all the tools you need as you navigate your fertility journey. I'm your host, Jennifer Edmonds, and for the last 15 years, I've been helping women on their journeys to motherhood and beyond. I believe that combining the latest scientific research along with the best energetic and mindset practices will help you to avoid putting your life on hold and bring you closer to your baby. Each week, you'll learn ways to support your fertility and trust your body so that you can stop stressing that you'll never have your baby and finally walk your path to motherhood. This is the Your Journey to Fertility podcast. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I feel like the universe was throwing this episode at me recently. I've had so many messages from my students saying, Jen, why is this concept of surrender so difficult? And how do I actually get there? And I've also had a lot of people say to me, what actually is it? It sounds great, but I don't really know how to get from where I am now into this place that sounds like this beautiful idea of surrender. It's a big one, and it's a very, very hard place to get to because it's a really simple concept in theory, but when you start thinking about, well, how do I actually let go of what I want the most and get to this place where I'm happy to go with the flow and I'm letting go of all of the timelines and it feels impossible. So this episode is really designed to help you get into a place where things can just feel a little bit easier and you're getting into that place of knowing that you are on the right path on this journey. It's hard because you are basically being asked to believe in something that doesn't exist yet, something that you have no evidence that it's actually possible. And in a lot of cases, it's something that you've never really had a taste of before. The moment for me that I realized no amount of trying harder or doing more or being more perfect was going to change the outcome of my journey was after my very last round of IVF wasn't successful. I hate using the word failed. I know people use the term failed cycles all the time, but for me, that terminology just adds to the load of awful words that we throw at women on this journey. So my last round of IVF wasn't successful, and I had done everything perfectly. Like I had gotten 100% on that test. I had taken the 3 months. I had done the diet, the supplements. We hadn't had any caffeine, any alcohol. We had had all the sleep we could possibly get. Everything looked perfect on paper and it still didn't work. And I realized that I couldn't keep going this way. I couldn't keep giving up every single part of my life, taking away everything that made me happy, brought me joy, just for this chance. And when you do all of that and you do it perfectly for weeks and months or even years at a time, and it doesn't get you anywhere, that's where I think people come into this idea of maybe it's time for me to let go. And when I say let go, I'm not talking about giving up. That is not what this episode is about. There is a very big difference between giving up on what you want and the dreams of what you want for your future, and giving up of that grasping and that desperate need to control the outcome. I realized I couldn't keep going this way because it had just taken away everything that I loved. My relationship was suffering. My friendships had suffered months and months before this point. I didn't even prepare a meal without thinking, is this going to be something that affects my fertility this month? I'm fortunate to say that throughout my life, I've never really struggled with mental health issues, but I was struggling at this stage. I had chronic insomnia. I was at the point where sleeping tablets weren't even really working anymore. I was taking twice the dosage that I was originally given just to be able to get a few hours sleep a night. No one wants to live this way. There is a moment on this journey where all the things that you're doing, they stop working. And that is when you realize that you can't go on. And I find that is where surrender really begins. And in this episode today, I want to help you get there, but I want to help you get there long before I reached that point where I was at that rock bottom. I was crying on the bathroom floor at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't want you to get to that point before you have to tap into this ability to surrender. Now, I think it's worth noting that this idea of surrender, I get a bit of pushback from whenever I speak about it, because it gets lumped in a lot with comments around this whole idea of, well, you can't want it so badly. I had so many people say to me, Jen, you just want it too much. You need to think about other things, or just put your attention elsewhere. It'll start happening when you stop thinking about it. And I'm sure we can all relate to all of those ridiculously insensitive comments. But that is not how I want to frame this episode. That's not really where I'm coming from at all. Because how do you let go of something that you want so deeply? And that's not what I want you to do. I don't want you to ever give up on your dreams. Absolutely. So when someone says to you, you just can't want it so badly, it's not going to happen until you stop thinking about it. That is not the vibe of this episode at all. My intention here is to reframe surrender as empowered trust, not this passive energy of just giving up. And I think the best way to get your head around this, especially from a yogic perspective, is to talk about what surrender is not. That, I think, is a little bit of an easier way to help you frame where I'm going with this topic today. Some of these might not be what you want to hear. And like I said, I get a lot of pushback when I talk about surrender for all of the things that I just mentioned. But I'm not here to tell you exactly what you want to hear. I am here to help you get through this. So surrender is not giving up on your dreams. It is giving up on that timeline. This is huge, and we're going to talk about this in detail in a minute. It is not about ignoring your feelings. It is allowing those feelings to move through you and allowing everything to be there and to be present rather than letting them get stuck or rather than pushing them away. It's not about pretending to be okay or forced or toxic positivity. It's about learning to hold both the pain of what you're going through and the peace of what is possible in that same breath, in that same moment, that same thought. And you don't surrender because you don't care anymore. It's not about giving up and saying, well, it doesn't even matter what happens anymore. I've been through too much. I'm over this. And you may get to the point where you decide that this isn't what you pursue anymore, but that's not what this episode is necessarily about. You surrender because you care so deeply that you're willing to trust the process and that the outcome and the timeline and the journey is something that is bigger than you. This whole journey, and when you are able to look back on it, it should be able to make sense. I hope that you get to that point where it can make sense. When I was going through my second fertility journey, I was living overseas in the Middle East, and we didn't have a lot of people around us that were close friends and that I could confide in. And I always had intended to go back to Australia to go through treatments again. But the medical system where we were living was wonderful. And I found a great clinic and a great doctor that I really trusted. So I thought, I'm going to give this everything that I've got. And at the back of my mind, I had in my head that I couldn't go back to Australia until my journey was over, until my family was complete. We had planned to go overseas for a set amount of time for work. And during this time, I had so many friends back home. I'm sure you can relate to this, that had already started their journeys after me, that already had their first, their second babies, they'd completed their families. And I had in my head, when the time comes that we're ready to move back to Sydney, I can't go home empty-handed. I can't go back to all of my friends with their happy families and I'm not there. But who put this timeline pressure on me? Who decided that it had to be within this certain time frame? I had this picture, the whole thing around having 2 kids under 2, that was going to be my life. I wanted even less of an age gap than that. But who put this timeline on me? I did. I was the only one that said it has to be now and it has to be when I want it to be. Because what would it have actually mattered if it had been that I had gone back to Australia and I hadn't completed my family, but then I did a year or two later? What difference would it have actually made in the end? Nothing. It wouldn't have made any difference. But for some reason, I just had in my head I couldn't do it. And in the way that things work out, when COVID happened, we were stuck overseas for a lot longer than we had intended. And it did work out in its own weird and wonderful way. But I want you to really get into a place of, what is this timeline that you have created for yourself? Why did you create that? Was it because everyone else around you was having their family with this whole idea of your kids need to be 2 years apart or less? Did you always say to yourself, well, I want to have 3 kids by the age of 35 or 40 or whatever it is? Really think to yourself, where is this timeline pressure coming from? Because time is huge when we are talking about surrender. We can plan exactly what we want. We can tell the universe exactly what it is that we want and desire most deeply in our lives. But then that is all we can do. The how and the when is not up to you. You can take aligned action and you can take all of the steps forward to help get you to where you want to be. But really, that handing over and that trusting of the how and the when is what surrender is all about. So now that we're clear what surrender is not, what does it really mean? And what does it actually look like when you're on this journey? I love this quote. I don't know where this came from, but this is something that I have heard over and over again, and it's beautiful. Surrender is the acceptance of what is, not the rejection of what you want. It is that shift of control, that grasping, that gripping of holding so tightly, to that being able to cooperate with life and to go with what is happening in your life at this present moment. And it's when that energy shifts from forcing to flowing. And that's a nice little alliteration, little cliche there, but it is so, so true. This idea of being able to flow with the energy of what's coming to you rather than forcing and saying it has to be now because I say so. Surrender is really highly correlated with nervous system regulation as well. And that is, of course, something that I speak about so much on this podcast because it is a huge component of what I do. That feeling of finally exhaling after so long, where your hormones literally start to shift and change and resynchronize. It's that feeling of your energy softening. And it makes your whole life feel easier. And that is why I talk about nervous system regulation so much. It's not about you need to regulate your nervous system because it's going to get you closer to your positive pregnancy test. It's going to get you closer to your baby. I want you to be able to learn how to regulate your nervous system because it's going to make every part of your life feel easier. Surrender is this beautiful, energetic opening. When you stop gripping, you actually then start to create space for what is meant to arrive. There's this saying that nature abhors a vacuum, which basically means where there is space, the universe will rush in to fill that gap. So if you are spending your days rushing from appointment to appointment, spending so many hours on the internet and scrolling through forums and chat rooms and trying to get answers to these never-ending questions, and you're in this energy of every moment of the day is taken up with this desperate need to support your journey of trying to conceive. I'm sure you can relate to that. It is such an overwhelming place to be. But we need to create space for what we want most. That idea of allowing time to rest, physical rest, mental, emotional rest, that is where that space is created. And that's where the universe can say, well, there is room in this person's life for what they actually want. I feel like I went through different stages of surrender, and I see variations of this with my students all the time. So I'm going to give you kind of the steps or the stages that I went through, and maybe you can relate to some of this. The first stage for me was control. And I think when you go through life and you're so used to working hard to achieve what you want, and you get to this place of being stuck with a fertility diagnosis or whatever it might be, you feel so helpless and you feel so out of control. And this diagnosis is something that you can't do anything about. You didn't do anything wrong. It's just slapped on you out of nowhere. And you feel like you have to hand over your body, and all these tests are telling you something that you never, ever thought was possible. When you are in that place and you're so out of control, when you start to realize that there actually is quite a lot that you can do to support your fertility in terms of lifestyle, nutrition, supplementation, so many holistic treatments, it feels so good to take control again. And for a lot of people, maybe that works. Maybe it works really quickly. But I suspect if you are listening to this podcast, like me, you are one of those people where taking control of everything, it didn't work for you. And that's where I think the first step really starts. This trying to plan, fix, control, predict everything, being able to really predict the outcome of every single cycle or what is going on within your treatment plan is really hard. So recognizing that you are trying to take control is the first step. This awareness piece is always that first step. The next piece for me was the collapse, the burnout, the exhaustion, getting to this point where you realize that nothing has worked and you start to tip over into that place of apathy, hopelessness, helplessness, depression. That's where all of those places live, that crushing disappointment of knowing that no matter what you do, nothing is going to work. The third step or stage for me was acceptance. That's where I think after my lowest point, after that lowest point of burnout and overwhelm, where I realized that something in my life had to change because I was miserable and nothing was working. Even the stuff that was good in my life was not bringing me any joy anymore. Accepting and realizing that you can't control every step of this journey or the outcome of every single test or procedure or treatment is huge. That piece is where we really start to tip the scales. The next stage for me was trust. And that is where I think that I really got into some of these practices and a lot of these regulating practices that I talk about so much. Being able to choose to believe that life is still working for you, that there are still wonderful things in your life, that even though you aren't exactly where you want to be, do you still have a wonderful relationship? Maybe you have an incredible career. You have amazing friends around you. Maybe you have a child already, but maybe your family doesn't feel completely complete. But knowing that there are so many things in your life that still deserve your attention. And it's not this, you should be grateful for what you have. No, absolutely not. And I talk about secondary infertility a lot in this piece, but just trusting that life is unfolding in its own timeline and knowing that you will get there. And in the meantime, enjoying what is here in front of you. And then the last stage, I think, that is not going to be something that you get to and stay there is this idea of flow, that peace in the uncertainty. Oh, and even saying that now, I know how hard that is. Even looking back when I was in the midst of everything, being able to say, I'm okay, no matter what the outcome. And I don't have to necessarily love that. I don't have to be happy with it every single moment, but I'm going to find joy in the small moments and in other areas of my life. And I'm almost going to get to the stage where I'm okay, no matter what happens. That is what surrender is. And that is where things change. That is, for me, where everything shifted. So how do you actually get there? When you go through these stages, I think the control and then that collapse are things that are going to happen on their own. But going through acceptance and then trusting and then flowing through that, how do we get to that stage? That's where I want to help you today. These practices to support letting go are not going to be things that you get right every single day. You're not even going to get them right twice in a moment. It is going to be this moment by moment choice. And some days you're still going to be miserable, and that's okay. We want to allow space and time for every single emotion that is there. Daily rituals for me were the lifeline. And when I got to that point of acceptance and knowing that something needed to change, that is where I found this incredibly powerful practice of fertility yoga. And when we think about yoga, we always think about this person doing movements on a yoga mat. And that is one part of yoga. But what I learned and what I eventually went and studied and went really deep into is that there are actually 8 components or 8 different things that make up a yoga practice. So yes, the movement that you see on the mat is one of them, but these other parts of yoga really were my daily rituals. So they are things like breath work, meditation, the way that you treat yourself, the way that you treat others, working towards stages of enlightenment and just sort of knowing that there is a greater plan or a greater picture here that's going on. So for me, all of these daily rituals were like brushing my teeth. I talk about this idea of the toolkit, this concept of having your own little toolbox of things that you can take out when you need them. And there are things that you can do in the moment when you are triggered and overwhelmed. But having this toolbox of things that you do daily that are going to support you, I find made the whole difference for me. And even today, if I find I've had a number of days in a row where I haven't slept well, I haven't seen a lot of sunlight, I haven't gotten outside and moved my body, I don't feel great. And that's where anxiety starts to creep in. I feel overwhelmed by little tasks. I get completely frustrated when small things happen. So knowing what it is for you, what do your daily practices look like? And all of those things that I mentioned, and it might be other things for you, being creative, cooking, spending time with certain people. These are all crucial. So get your daily rituals going. Breathwork for me is a non-negotiable. I love this saying, where the breath goes, the nervous system follows. And we know that the breath is that one gateway between the conscious mind and the unconscious. If we had to think about doing all of the amazing things that our body is capable of doing for us on a moment by moment basis, we wouldn't live very long. If we had to stop and think, wait, I've just got to digest my lunch, I've got to remember to keep my heart beating, I've got to make sure that my digestive system is all of the things, right? We would not last very long. But thankfully, your autonomic nervous system takes control of all of that for you. But whilst you don't have to think about breathing all day, every day, thank goodness, it is actually the one thing that you can control to then have a direct impact on your body's response. So those slow, deep breaths, especially those slow exhales, allowing full expansion of your diaphragm when you're breathing. These are not things that we do consciously very often. So when you can take time, starting with 5 minutes a day, to really focus on your breath, and in the moment when you're feeling really anxious or overwhelmed, hands on your belly, hands on your heart, and just inhaling all of the things that you think are possible, and exhaling and letting go of that sense of control, reminding yourself of that. That would be, if you had to do anything in your toolbox every day, that would be my absolute number one go-to. Journaling prompts that I want to give you for this episode to help you get into that energy of surrender. I'm going to give you 3. So you can write these down or come back to these when you have a moment. The first is, where am I really gripping tightly on this journey? So where is it that I cannot let go of control? Is it that I have to spend X amount of time with ChatGPT or Googling or jumping down Reddit, the whole rabbit holes every day? Do I feel that constant need for answers? Is it that I can't stop checking my temperature? If you find that, following these ovulation tracking apps, or you've got one of those wearable devices and you're constantly obsessing about it, maybe that's something that you can let go of control. I talk about this with my students all the time. And yes, we need to track ovulation and we need to be sensible about things to be able to plan stuff. But if it's really becoming obsessive, take a couple of months off. Your body gives you enough signals on its own of when things are happening at each stage of the month. And I found that taking my body temperature every morning was so stressful because I didn't have a wearable device. I was literally getting my thermometer every moment when I woke up, and if I forgot and I was like, oh, if I wrecked it for that day, it was so stressful. So just ask yourself, where are you gripping and where can you potentially loosen a little bit of that hold? The second journal prompt is, what would it feel like to trust in my journey just for today? Just for one day, what would look different if you said, I am just going to hand over everything to the universe today. I'm going to take all of my worries, all of my fears, put them in a bag and just hand it over. What would that feel like and what would be different? What would you do differently? How would you feel? Would there be different things that would happen within your day? And just think about for a moment, what would it be like if you could feel like that tomorrow and the next day as well? And then the third thing that I would like you to write down and journal around is, what does trust look like for me within my body? So if you can trust both the universe is doing its thing and trust that your body is capable, if you knew for absolute certainty that your next IVF cycle was going to work, or that in 3 months' time, that was going to be the month that you finally conceived, and you could just trust your body in the meantime, what would that look like for you today? What would you do differently? Would you beat yourself up if you had that extra glass of wine or that extra piece of chocolate cake, or if you didn't get to your workout or whatever it is? Being able to just trust and honor your body, what would that look like for you today? I talk about movement quite a lot. Obviously, I am a movement teacher, so that is such a huge part of my life, and I don't think it's something that I can ever stop teaching. But whatever it is, whether it is through your own yoga practice, which is so beautiful and beneficial on this journey, or whether it is being in nature and just allowing your body to physically release some of its tension, it is such a powerful thing that you can do. I always tell my students, movement is medicine, just like food can be medicine. Make it a daily priority in your life. Notice how you feel when you change your environment. I think this is really important and not something that we think about that much, but when you are very, very stressed and overwhelmed, maybe you're waiting for a phone call, you've had an argument, or you're really upset about something that someone said to you or a doctor said to you, changing your environment can really change your behavior and your reaction to what is going on. So instead of continuing down this stress spiral, get outside or go to a studio or roll out your yoga mat, whatever it might be, and see how your mood really shifts. And the last thing I want to give you for this little piece of how to shift into surrender daily is to give you some affirmations. And I want you to always remember that affirmations need to come after you are in a place of regulation. We can't do them from a place of feeling anxious or overwhelmed. I love these. I'm not usually much of an affirmation person, but I find to get into that energy of letting go, these are really powerful. The first one is, I don't need to chase what is already mine. Because there is that concept that once you tell the universe what it is that you want, it's already yours. It's already on its way to you. But again, it's that control of the timeline that we need to let go of. The second is, I am safe to trust in the timing of the universe, letting go of the when. And the third is, I surrender the how and when, and I choose peace instead. So they may be something that you want to repeat to yourself in the morning or last thing at night before you go to bed, and just really allow yourself to get into that energy of letting go. I want to talk about now some signs that you're already in that space of surrender. So maybe this is something that you want to come back to. Maybe write these down or come back to this episode in a few weeks' time and think about what has shifted for you. What has started to change? What does your life look like? And how are things perhaps a little bit different? Number one is, you have released your obsession of when it will happen. And you've released that obsession with gripping tightly. So maybe it is less scrolling, less obsessing, less worrying about that person who's going to trigger you and avoiding them at all costs. The second is, you feel more grounded, even when the outcomes are uncertain. So a setback that you might get months ago might have completely thrown off your day or your week. But now you're feeling like a setback throws you off for, an hour or half a day, but then you really feel like you're able to rebalance and get back to your old self again. The third is that you are focusing on living your life again. Not every single moment of your day is dictated by your journey of trying to conceive. So this looks like more joy, more connection, more creativity. This idea of being able to create things in your life out of creating a baby is huge. So all the things that you used to love that you've completely forgotten about, things that brought you joy that you've decided are taking up too much of your time or that aren't on that direct path to having your baby, reclaiming some of that joy again. The fourth is you're more in tune with your intuition rather than fear, and you can tap into that knowing more easily of, okay, is this fear running the show, or is this quiet knowing, that whisper of your intuition telling you exactly what is right for you? And the fifth thing is that you can see the lessons and the meanings within things, even within the waiting. And that's probably the hardest thing to recognize at the time. It is something that I hate to say this because it's one of those things I can say easily in hindsight. But all of the challenges, the setbacks, the devastating moments that I went through throughout my fertility journey, through pregnancy loss, through so much heartache, was that I can look at setbacks in my life now and I will know that they will bring me closer to what I want in the future. I can look at setbacks now and say, these are lessons that are going to serve me better later on. And that is only something I can do because of what I went through to have my family. And like I said, that's a really easy thing to say in hindsight, but I honestly hope that that is a place that you can get to one day in your own life as well. I want to remind you as well that if you are listening to this podcast, then you are probably already on the journey of surrendering. You've already gotten to that place where the obsession and the control isn't working for me. I want to do something differently. There has to be a better way. Being here and listening to this, you're already choosing that piece of awareness over control. You are already on the right path. The last thing I want to mention through this episode today is surrender it's pretty spiritual. I think it's not something that a doctor is going to talk to you about. It's not something that we're taught about in school. I found this incredibly comforting when I was drowning through infertility, and I'm not someone who is religious, so I never had that place of spirituality to come back to. But being able to drop into something that is greater than ourselves, drop into that divine, that surrender, and knowing that the soul of your future baby has their own timeline as well. I think we forget that. That was something that I had never thought about until someone mentioned it to me. They've got their own journey and their own timeline that they're planning to work through. And we want to force it and make it join up with our timeline right now. But sometimes just knowing that that little being is going to be walking their own path sometimes is quite comforting. When you actually get into that place of I'm going to trust and you stop trying to control, I find that's when we start co-creating with it and things just start to fall into place. And I want you to know that if you have already done the work, if you have expanded where you can, you've taken the aligned action where is needed, then your only next step is to drop into surrender and to trust that you have done enough. Your next step is to let go of the need to do more, because surrender isn't something that you achieve. It is something that you practice every single day, and it's something that you come back to one moment after the next. And if you want some daily grounded and guided practices to really help you get into this routine and knowing how to trust your body, know that I have so many resources. I have so many free resources. I have programs for you to help go into this work a lot deeper. You can find links to all of those in the show notes. All these things I talk about so much and all of the practices that I learned for myself, these are things that you can start to learn about yourself. So I hope that you have found this episode helpful. If you did, if you think that this is something that someone in your life would also benefit from, please share it with them. You never know who is really struggling. And this is something that we don't talk about enough. We talk about how hard the journey is. We talk about the difficult steps that we go through. We talk about the medical stuff so much. But this idea of being able to trust is something that is incredibly powerful. So please share it with anyone who you think might need it. Now, next week on the podcast, I have the pleasure of interviewing Kelly Johnson, who is going to be all about the aligned action on this journey. And she's taking us into the importance of advocating for yourself when you're trying to conceive. She is someone who has been through the whole works of this journey. She's been through multiple losses, multiple rounds of IVF, both primary and secondary infertility, and she is still in the midst of her own journey as well. She is going to help you learn how to advocate for yourself in an effective way and not in a way that makes you feel pushy or that is something that you're ever going to receive pushback from in terms of your medical team as well. This is an interview that is not to be missed. I got so much from speaking to her. So I cannot wait to have you back next week for that episode. But until then, I am sending you all of my wishes as you continue your own journey to fertility.